is a course in Christian social ethics. You'll recall that I've said that social ethics has to do with critical and systematic reflection on the social and institutional dimensions of our moral life. In other words, social ethics has to do with our judgments about the rightness and wrongness of the policies and practices of institutions, particularly basic ones related to our social, economic, and political lives, and including the government, or public policy, or law. Social ethics evaluates those matters from the perspective of our moral beliefs and practices. I've said this is a course in Christian social ethics. That means we'll be thinking about the rightness and wrongness of the policies and practices of institutions, including the government, from the perspective of distinctly Christian beliefs and practices. This raises an interesting question. Doesn't the very enterprise of Christian social ethics violate the separation of church and state? Consider this saying attributed to Ulysses S. Grant, who was a great Civil War general and later President of the United States. Grant supposedly said at one time, "Leave the matter of religion to the family altar, the church, and the private school, supported entirely by private contributions. Keep the church and state forever separate." Or consider the following quotation from Senator Barry Goldwater of Arizona in 1981. Goldwater had been the Republican nominee for the presidency in 1964 and lost badly, but continued on as a senator. He's commenting here on the lobbying activities of the Moral Majority, headed by Jerry Falwell of Liberty University, a conservative religious organization supporting very conservative policies. Goldwater's opposition might be then a bit surprising because Goldwater himself was quite conservative. But listen to what he said. "I'm frankly sick and tired of the political preachers across the country telling me as a citizen that if I want to be a moral person, I must believe in A, B, C, and D. Just who do they think they are? And from where do they presume to claim the right to dictate their moral beliefs to me? And the religious factions will go on imposing their will on others unless the decent people connected to them recognize that religion has no place in public policy. They must learn to make their views known without trying to make their views the only alternatives. The great decisions of government cannot be dictated by the concerns of religious factions. We have succeeded for 205 years in keeping the affairs of state separate from the uncompromising idealism of religious groups, and we mustn't stop now." Goldwater's reference to success in the last 205 years is a reference to the U.S. Constitution and its so-called separation of church and state. You should be clear and understand what the Constitution actually says. Interestingly, the words separation of church and state, or wall of separation, which you will sometimes hear, are not in the Constitution. What is there is this: the religion clauses of the First Amendment to the Bill of Rights in the U.S. Constitution. "Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof." An excellent resource for understanding the First Amendment is the website associated with the First Amendment Center, which is affiliated with Vanderbilt University and the Museum in Washington, D.C. Its website is, the link to it is referenced here. The Establishment Clause is the one saying that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. What this means is a complicated matter, but the bottom line is this. Congress, and later, by extension, the entire federal government and the states, may not give official status to any particular religion or church. An established religion is one that is recognized and given a unique role by the government. That could mean a variety of things, that one had to belong to that church to be a citizen, or to run for public office, or that it's the policies of government must be approved by church leaders. In the United States, that may not be done. Congress, the states, may not pass any law respecting or creating an establishment of religion. The Religious Liberty Clause is the one that says that Congress may make no law prohibiting the free exercise of religion. This means that the government may not use its coercive power to try to manipulate or coerce your religious beliefs and practices, or those of anyone else. Now, the First Amendment Center points out that the courts have made a distinction between beliefs and practices. The government may do nothing to shape your beliefs. That's almost absolute, though there may be some limits on what you can do in practice, and that makes sense, because what you do based on your religious beliefs might well conflict with the rights of others. The basic idea is then that everyone has the right to believe in and practice whatever religion or none that they choose. The government will not, should not, may not interfere with those religious beliefs. Let me point out that nothing in the First Amendment suggests that religious people or their organizations, such as churches, synagogues, or mosques, are prohibited from trying to influence public policy. Indeed, the limits established by the First Amendment are on what governments may do. The Center for the First Amendment says it this way: the Establishment Clause separates church from state, but not religion from politics or public life. Individual citizens are free to bring their religious convictions into the public arena, but the government is prohibited from favoring one religious view over another, or even favoring religion over non-religion. I encourage you to spend some time on the frequently asked questions section of the First Amendment Center's website. You will see there how complicated these clauses are and their legal implications. For our purposes, though, I want you to pay particular attention to their answer to the question as to whether religious organizations are allowed to lobby on matters of public policy. Their answer is a clear yes. Religious organizations may engage in lobbying activities, they say, as long as the lobbying does not form a substantial part of their activities. But what you should notice is that this is a reference to simply their tax-exempt status. Religious organizations may lobby all they want. They lose their tax-exempt status if that activity is a substantial part of what they do, and then they lose their status as a 501c non-profit, non-partisan organization. But still, they are free to lobby all they want. The bottom line here is this: there is nothing illegal or unconstitutional about Christian people or people of any religious affiliation or their churches or religious organizations. There's nothing illegal or unconstitutional about their trying to influence public policy. This is not, at least as the Supreme Court has interpreted the Constitution, a violation of its so-called separation of church and state as defined by those two religion clauses. There is nothing unconstitutional, we might say, about the enterprise of Christian social ethics as we are engaging in it in this class. Of course, just because something isn't illegal or unconstitutional, or prohibited by law or the Constitution, doesn't mean that it's a good idea to do it. The idea of separation of church and state in our society is a much bigger or broader or more inclusive idea than simply a legal one. And there are many reasons that people have suggested that religion ought to be kept separate from politics, even if the Constitution does not require it. In the next presentation in this series on religion and politics, we will look at three kinds of reasons that religion and politics should be kept separate, reasons beyond a constitutional argument. The first kind of reason has to do with the nature and purpose of religion itself, including Christianity. The idea would be that the Christian message is primarily an individual or a personal and private one. A second kind of reason for keeping religion and politics separate is based upon the historical claim that when religion and politics have been mixed, violence and intolerance and all sorts of other bad things have only increased. Finally, some people would argue that religious reasoning in public discourse or in our conversation as a society about what laws and policies ought to govern our lives, that religious reasoning is inappropriate or invalid in this public context where not everyone shares the same religious convictions. We will look at each of those arguments and responses to them next time.